Akhetaten's Gates, Chapter 10. The young prince and I were virtually inseparable. Any time it was possible, we found each other and became a real pair. He was my best friend, and I was his only friend. He seemed to not even keep company with not only the harem children, who were his siblings, but not even his sisters, born of his mother. I was rather privileged, even for a simple harem girl. This friendship was very beneficial. Aside from the joy that we brought to one another, his constant company seemed to deter Amenhotep III from his advances towards me. But perhaps I also had Queen T to thank for that. Every morning before the sun had even risen, Amenhotep IV would creep into the harem and to my chamber to wake me. Of course, he had every right to go to the harem. Being regent, that made him crown prince, and he would inherit all these women from his father as his own wives. But he was considerate enough at such that hour to be silent to allow it to remain silent. Why wake up his infant siblings and their mothers when all he wanted was me? He would let me get dressed and aware. Then he would take me from the harem to a special place on the palace roof. He took great joy in watching the sunrise and wanted to share it with me. I certainly wouldn't call this interest of his invigorating, but it was peaceful. It was, in a sense, a very intimate moment between us. We would have conversations with great ease, which was more to my pleasure. But then, perhaps it was not so intimate. I never told him about America, or Bernard and Darla, or the 20th century at all. I didn't tell him about the strange sun creature that seemed to hold my destiny by puppet strings. Superstitious or not, even those kinds of things were far-fetched. But I felt a little sorry about it. I wanted to share things about me with him. I wanted to be close with him, since he was being so with me. It was unfair, wasn't it? More often than not, he was the one speaking, monopolizing the conversation. But I didn't mind. I took pleasure in his trust. On one of those routine mornings, we sat in our routine place, watching as the sun peeked over the horizon. He leaned back on his elbows and let out a deep sigh. Of course, that got my attention. I don't have a very good relationship with my father. He was always about Thutmose. Well, how was your relationship with Thutmose? I asked him. Almost non-existent, he sighed. Any poor excuse for a relationship was never very good. I mean, sure, sometimes we could be civil. But he was about image. It looked good to pity me in public. But most of the time, he was so cruel to me. He was arrogant and a real jerk. He looked away. I hated him. And my father thought it was funny. Rather than give me any support, he simply laughed off all the quarrels and would give such praise to Thutmose. My brother took such delight in making me cry. Oh, and how he would taunt me. Real princes don't cry, he'd tell me. Or, the title of great house could never be bestowed upon you. You are such a girl. I'm the only son among a slew of sisters. My father's opinion about it was simply that boys would be boys. Brothers pick on brothers. And a strong personality would be worshipped. A real jerk, I repeated. I have tried so hard to please and impress my father, but nothing ever seemed to work. Needless to say, he was devastated when Thutmose became ill and died. I thought, maybe after the mourning, he would come around. I'd be his eldest son. I thought maybe then I could be the center of his universe, the way that Thutmose was, and that he'd lavish me with his attention and wisdom. I thought, maybe finally, he'd see me, acknowledge me. But it didn't really work out that way. It improved, sure, but it didn't really. I get it. Any attention that was remotely positive was most certainly because of the persistence and power of my mother. She is a very strong woman. She's scary, I said. But one thing is for certain, and that even I can't question. My father is very much in love with her, and she is his favorite wife. He would do anything for her happiness. although I don't think he'd have any happiness if she were unhappy. You saw how she could get. He sat up, bringing his knees to his chest and wrapping his arms about them. That's the only reason my father crumbled under her demand for me to be his heir. I don't think he has any faith in me. Do you want to be king? I asked. You sound like you doubt yourself too. It doesn't really matter, he sighed. I never expected it. I just thought I'd always live in Tutmose's shadow. I expected that I would forever be nobody. That maybe I would find someone to keep me company and someone to love me for me. That maybe, if anything, I could at least have a simple family of my own. Tutmose had a lot of fuss placed over him. Lots of lessons and things. I suppose in that aspect, I don't envy him. So, Egypt raised your brother. My mother has my respects most, he declared. She raised me and my sisters almost entirely by herself. All of them are independent. I envy that. You kind of remind me of them, actually. Except that you actually pay attention to me. I do? I asked in surprise. I love them very much. My mother was a very good mother. I hope one day I can find a woman just like her. I swallowed nervously, noting his side glance at me. Was he saying what I think he was saying? I said nothing in reply, but I did blush rather deeply, looking away to hide my sudden bashfulness. Our days consisted of what every child's day was consumed by. After some lessons, which Amenhotep always insisted that I attend with him, we'd play. Normally we would find secluded places in one of the gardens, or zoo, or palace wings. His half-siblings had no interest in joining in our games, so it was always just the two of us. There was no point then in playing in the harem. Besides, he was still shy and only felt confident without his cloak and my presence alone. Still, his self-consciousness seemed to rule his life. Our games normally consisted of physical activities. I was always careful, however, about playing too rough. He wasn't very muscular or as robust, so even when we wrestled, it was in a gentle nature. But over time, he began to slim down and gain the muscle he had lacked. He was looking rather nice, though not a complete improvement. He was stronger and had more stamina. He'd lost some fat weight and gained muscle weight, but he still had wide hips and a drooping belly. But he was a much healthier him. He tinted to a lovely tanned color, now that he was without his cover, and he was able to be out in the sun. Oh, and how hard it was to resist his wonderful smile. Slowly, I could see the real him shining through. My kindness was bringing out his confidence. On one particular afternoon, it was, as quite the norm in Egypt, rather hot. I was resting by a pool in the royal gardens, which was separate from the harem gardens. I was sunbathing on a block of sandstone. Every few minutes, I would sprinkle some water over myself, cooling myself, if only for a few seconds. I was rather oblivious to the activities, or rather lack thereof, about me. So needless to say, I was quite startled, to be polite, when Amenhotep IV tackled atop me. "Hey, Nefertiti!" I let out a scream, jolting up, pushing him onto his knees. "Amenhotep!" He laughed hysterically, holding onto his sides. He seemed rather impressed with his stealthy self. The bastard. I would have probably joined him in his laughter if I weren't so gosh darn mad at him. "You're gonna get it," I shouted. "I'm gonna get you." He got to his feet. "That would require you to catch me first, Nefertiti," he said. So up I got and made chase. I bet everyone in Egypt underestimated his speed, strength, and stamina. I actually had a hard time keeping up with him. It took pure chance to finally catch up with him, even if it was by unfair means. He crashed into something, and I crashed into him and the something. "What in the world is going on here?" a startled voice cried out. We peered up to see Queen T staring intently down on us. Amenhotep and I stepped back, and he gave her the sweetest smile. "We are merely taking advantage of what is left of childhood, Mother." Oh, and did he ever spread that charm on thick, giving her wide, adorable puppy eyes. She was lured in and smiled at us warmly. You two should try to be a little more careful. I'd hate for either of you to trip and hurt yourselves. Yes, ma'am, we replied bashfully in unison. Come have lunch, she offered. All of that running around must have built up quite an appetite. We both gave her a nod, and she led us along. I gave a little snicker as I began to waddle behind her. Amenhotep watched me, curious a moment before laughing and imitating me. T peered over her shoulder at us. What are you two doing? Are you mocking this old woman? No, ma'am, I smiled brightly. We're following you like little baby ducks. Ducks? Oh, I see. Ha! What I'd give to be young again and be able to play these games. I felt privileged. I was very much a part of the royal family. I was not a princess, but I got to enjoy life as one. I got to dine with the family and see the functions. I was always present in Amenhotep's lessons. As well, I was a special resident of the harem, not being a daughter of the harem, not being a bride, and still being a virgin. I was a true oddity. As for the lessons, Amenhotep had been taking them for years, as noble people simply had to learn to read. But with the death of his brother, intensive learning had to be done to make him throne-worthy. But I got to take part as well. In fact, the teacher had actually commented on how naturally and fast I picked up the information. He teased often that I could be one of his ministers, having equal knowledge to him. But above all of this meant Amenhotep's happiness, and that was what T and I strive for most. Back on the subject, it was a lovely meal, for a small size. We only ate a small amount, and were rather eager to return to our games. I had finished first, and waited patiently for him. He would have darted up immediately, but his mother had grabbed his wrist. No, you don't! Mother, sit a while. Let your food digest, or you'll be ill. The last thing we want is for you and your lovely lady friend to be ill all over the corridors. He sighed and sat down, fidgeting in his seat as I chuckled at him. Calm down, Amenhotep. Don't upset your lady friend, I teased. Lady friend. He shook his head. He remained horribly restless, making us both laugh, and this is how it remained for about 30 minutes. Finally, she let him go, having made an indention on his wrist from holding him so long. And we continued as we left off, with me making chase after him. Perhaps we could have been a little more considerate. We were so involved in ourselves that we never really cared to notice the poor courtiers. I really have to admire their agility. They were able to swiftly get out of our way and dodge our stampede of two. They amazingly never dropped anything or became too distracted, passing us off with a mutter and going back about their business. Some found it rather amusing and just a part of their day. Others, in passing, had quite miserable things to say under their breaths, and they were obviously very agitated. Our game lasted for hours. The exact time, I'm not really sure. It wasn't like there were functioning clocks and wristwatches in this part of the timeline. One thing was for sure. We worked up a sweat and became thoroughly out of breath. The walls, shielded away from the sun, were quite cool and welcoming. We heard some talking around the corner, which lured our curiosity. We could only briefly resist the temptation, glancing at each other, and then peeked around the corner, trying not to make ourselves known. We saw two courtiers, a guard and Amenhotep's advisor/keeper. I didn't know the guard by name, but I knew the other obviously, having been around Amenhotep so much. It's Tepi, I whispered. Amenhotep watched intently. Tepi was a childish nickname. His name was also Amenhotep, which seemed to be quite a popular name in the kingdom. Having at least 3 in the palace at one time could certainly be rather confusing. Amenhotep III was a professional man and always called him by name. But to Amenhotep IV and myself, he was Tepi. He had some nerve, the guard spat. I am a servant to the king. Where does that prince get off? You really should respect him, Tepi replied. He is co-regent. He will become king one day. Right now, his word is just as good as Pharaoh's. He is the mirror of his highness, so getting along with him would prove rather beneficial to you and your career. Huh. I shall not consider official until Amenhotep III is dead, and Amenhotep IV has a consort. That is so brash, Tepi scolded. Do not put his majesty into his grave so soon, and don't speak so poorly of his heir. The boy is only 12 years old. No matter! I just can't understand this negativity you people have towards him. He is such a good boy, and he's a very fine young man. He's smart and considerate. None of this would have been an issue if Tutmose was in his place. He was the firstborn son of the living Horus. He was fit from birth to be pharaoh. The guard turned up his nose in the air. Tepi began to chase after him as he huffed off. He then stopped short, realizing that we were there and had been listening. He looked completely shocked. Oh, my prince, I'm so sorry that you had to hear those horrible things. It's all right, Tepi, Amenhotep sighed sadly, staring down at the floor. A lot of people think like he does. I'm sure you did at first, too. You were a Tutmose supporter. But I serve you now, and I don't regret it. Have I ever given you any indication that I did? I actually prefer it. Tutmose was very arrogant and demeaning. You have this sense of compassion, humility, and sensitivity. You have a humble nature. That sounds more like a princess than a king. Oh, how I hated to see him so upset. I wanted him to smile always. Feeling the atmosphere growing heavy, I tried to lighten the mood. So, having three Amenhoteps so close together must make it awfully confusing sometimes. They both glanced at me in surprise. I almost wondered from their expressions if I had a bug on my face or something. The prince finally gave me a chuckle that relieved me. I agree. I think it's time for a new name. Tepi glanced at him. Do you have one in mind, my prince? He wiped his forehead, letting out a considerate hum. He then took his belt and wiped down a mirror nearby. He examined his reflection, taking every little thing into account. Neferkepurure Wanra. Why that name, I accused. I can't pronounce it once, let alone all the time. It means the unique one of Ra, Nefertiti. Tepi and I smiled. Okay, I said. It fits perfectly, but I still can't say it. Very befitting, my prince, Tepi bowed. Such is a fine coronation name. I'm still going to call you Amenhotep, I stated. I awoke on the morning of my 11th birthday. The first thing I thought was how odd it was for Amenhotep to be late. The sun was already up. That was unlike him. Well, perhaps it was just one of those days where he slept in. It wasn't like it never happened before, but it was just so rare. I sat up, wiped my eyes, and peered down to my sheets, and I screamed out. Oh no, 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 not that! This apparently alarmed some of the other women in the harem. They rushed to my chambers to answer my cries. Elder Lady knelt down beside me, the true matriarch of the harem. After tea herself, of course. What is wrong, Nefertiti? I leaned in to whisper in a husky voice. My woo-hoo is bleeding. Happy flippity-floppin' birthday to me. Ah, so you have your first moon blood, Elder Lady smiled. Congratulations. Congratulations? Are you serious? I wish I got my moon blood for my 11th birthday, one of the younger wives swooned. I was halfway 13 before mine finally came. Oh, you ladies are killing me, I groaned. You joined the world of fertility today, Elder Lady stated. That should please His Highness. I let out another groan. Okay, sure, it was inevitable. But there was never a time when I believed I'd be happy about it. I wanted pity, a back rub, and some chocolate. It didn't look like I was going to get any of that here. No, that was all in another lifetime, but I still wanted it. I flopped back on the bed with yet another groan. I want to die. Oh, cheer up, Elder Lady chuckled, patting me on the back. It is only temporary. I don't have one anymore. But I don't want to wait until I'm old, I whined. The other wives broke out into laughter, despite the cold glare Elder Lady cast them all over her shoulder. She turned up her nose. Humph! Well, I never! It had been a few hours, and my prince had still not come for me. I worried a little. Had something happened to him? Was he ill? Someone would tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't they? I mean, we were best friends. Wasn't I entitled? Oh dear, worrying about it only made me more and more paranoid. I was suddenly pulled from my worry by the cheers of the harem children. I peered out of my small window to see them flock about the feet of Amenhotep III. One girl was bold enough to hop up onto him and proceeded to climb up his body. He took hold of her with a gleeful laugh. I had to smile a little. Amenhotep III was a very hard man, but he did have a sweet side. He could be so compassionate. He loved animals. He loved his wives. Yes, all of them. And he loved his children. Perhaps he loved that so much more than the adults he had to put up with all day. It would be these moments where I could see the resemblance between Amenhotep III and his son. But it always seemed that something had to happen to crush it all. Nefertiti had her first moonblood, the child said, pointing at me through the window. The wives snickered. Boy, if I wasn't becoming the center of attention, that would almost be cute. But I blushed and felt horribly embarrassed. He seemed rather at ease with this information. Of course, that still made me nervous. He set his daughter down as he came towards my window. His stride seemed rather seductive. Well, does she now? I cowered a little away from the window, uncomfortable with any chance of him touching me. I just didn't trust him, especially if he was looking like that. I wasn't exactly in the most snuggly of moods either. Ugh, yeah, I do. Thankfully, it was just after that moment that Amenhotep IV made his entrance. It was one of the most gracious moments of the year for me. He was completely unaware of the situation that was attempting to unfold. All he knew was he was late, and he wanted to apologize frantically to me. He skid to a stop, nearly slamming into his father and the wall. However, he disregarded the very existence of his father. Considerably, I could think of such rudeness as just desserts. Nefertiti, I'm so sorry I was late. I slept in too late, and when I woke up, I had to rush to my lessons. I didn't have time to come and get you. Please, don't be mad at me. Are you mad at me? His father and I seemed suspended in that moment, but then I grew a large smile. I'm not mad at all. I'm actually really happy to see you. Really? He gleamed, letting off his sun-bright radiance. Then let's go swimming. Since we cannot spend the early morning together, let's enjoy the afternoon. And what a hot afternoon it is, I nodded. But are you sure your crazy body heat won't have a problem? You get cold easily. I'll be fine in this heat. Amenhotep III was turning a nice, scary shade of purple, having shot past red. He was not taking too kindly to being completely ignored, especially in his testosterone-driven state. Boy, can't you see that we were in the middle of something? It's nothing that I can't handle myself, Amenhotep IV said proudly, puffing out his chest and turning up his nose. That was a very bold move, even for the prince. Where did such confidence come from all of a sudden? Surprised as much as I was, Amenhotep III couldn't really react right away, as Amenhotep IV stepped between him and my wall, putting more distance between my quarters and the king. The prince took my hand and assisted me from the window, ignoring his father once more as he led me into the palace and away from the danger. Finally realizing what had just taken place, Amenhotep III stormed into the palace and marched after us. Boy, don't you walk off and ignore me! Why not? He spat, spinning around and turning such cold eyes on the old man. I gasped, slipping back after freeing my hand. That, too, was a bold reaction. Was this my Amenhotep? This was something worrisome. Amenhotep III was a good man and king, but he had a king's temper, and it was already established that father and son were not the closest. That is the sort of thing you have done to me for my entire life. Multiply this misery by a lifetime. You've got some gall, Amenhotep III hissed. I ought to. Flowed about her like a sea of lightning. Amenhotep! Both of them turned to her, of course, as she was not specific as to which of them she was referring to. But it became obvious as she approached the elder of the pair and grabbed him by the ear like he was some naughty child. Are you making him feel bad again? T, he's being cocky and disrespectful. I will not tolerate it. Yes, you will, she replied defiantly. You probably had it coming. Really, you should be congratulating him for such defiance. He would never have stood up to you before, and now look, you would be harsh on him for finally displaying a backbone? The very thing you would want in a king? He is making great progress to follow in your footsteps. Anyway, what were you two all yelling about anyway? Really, you two can be heard all the way down the hall. What caused this kind of ruckus? Amenhotep IV changed his expression from strong and confident to that of a sweet little boy turning puppy eyes on his mother. I just wanted Nefertiti to come swimming with me. I haven't seen her all day. I had already engaged her in a conversation, the king stated. I'm sure you were trying to engage in more than conversation, T accused. She's too young for you, you old pervert. She then batted her eyes at him. Besides, aren't I exotic and exciting enough for you? Ew. Of course, T. You are like no other. Double ew? My precious, she said to her son, a sweet womanly smile on her face. Do take your little girlfriend swimming. T. Oh, my love, if it gets him outside and active, let him go. Support his progress. Amenhotep crossed his arms. Humph, you really are an overbearing queen. Oh, now don't pout, she chuckled, lightly slapping his face. Why don't you take out your frustrations on me? I'll let you do as you wish. Oh, you haven't lost your spice, my love, he purred. Triple ew. I couldn't take it anymore. I quickly rushed to catch up with Amenhotep IV, who had the most sanity out of all of them at this point. That was gross. I don't want any image of your parents doing it. Doing it? He asked. You know, it. You mean sex? You don't want to imagine them having sex? Yuck! It bores me, really, he confessed. My father is very popular with all his wives, but my mother has always been at the top. I'm just used to all the sex going on in the palace. You really can't live here long without seeing signs of it somewhere. Someone is talking about it, doing it, smells of it, whatever the case may be. But still, I do hope that I can find someone I love that much, to want to be with all the time, and to still feel so passionate after many years have passed, as much as I felt when the relationship was young. I thought about it for a few minutes. He was hinting again. Was he talking about us? Or was he just ranting and rambling semi-coherently? It made me blush. It wasn't the first time he'd done something like that. I gave a giddy giggle, realizing afterwards I had thought too much and got too excited. I hugged him from behind. You're right, you know that? And I hope that one day you can get your happily ever after.